One of the things that we learn in the letter to Philemon is that Philemon was a slave-holding Christian. There is other evidence in the New Testament of Christians being slaveholders, but this is the most direct evidence by far. And in this letter, Paul, one of the highest ranking Christians in the New Testament, and the highest ranking Christian in the Gentile world in the first century, does not castigate Philemon for owning slaves. I have to say, it's not like Paul shied away from pointing out people's sins and errors. He wrote the letter to the Galatians to castigate them for submitting to circumcision. He hammered the church in Corinth for all sorts of immorality and for maintaining a Christian church where the poorest members were not given the same opportunities as the wealthy members. Paul absolutely shreds the pagan world for idolatry and immoral practices. And yet, when Paul addresses Philemon, he does not tell him that slavery is wrong. He merely asks him to reconsider his anger towards this one particular slave. Surely, this is further evidence that the New Testament church did not condemn the practice of slavery and was at least tolerated Christians owning slaves. However, in this letter, we also see Paul humanize a slave and soften the practice of slavery in his day. Paul says that Onesimus is his child and his beloved brother. Paul says that Onesimus, whose name, remember, means useful, was formerly useless to you, but who is now of use to you and to me. Paul does not regard Onesimus as a subhuman tool whose only purpose in life is to be of service to his master Philemon. He does not buy into this basic premise of ancient slavery. Paul can have affection for Onesimus and regard this slave as a brother, an equal in the eyes of Christ and in the Christian church. In fact, this is exactly how Paul suggests that Philemon, his master, should now see Onesimus as a brother, both in the flesh and in the Lord. As shocking as Christians allowing slavery in the first century can be to us today, people in the first century would have found this to be just as shocking. While not overturning the institution of slavery, Paul was shaking the foundations of it. This is why I argued earlier in the course that while the New Testament does not outrightly condemn slavery, it does, I think, set a trajectory that would be picked up by abolitionists centuries later, a trajectory which would allow us today to completely reject the institution as abhorrent and immoral. The most curious question we're faced with when looking at the letter to Philemon is whether or not Paul intended Philemon to free Onesimus. For perhaps it is for this reason that he departed for an hour, so that in return you might have him for the age. Okay, so the Greek here is a little unclear. Paul could mean that Philemon should see Onesimus as a fellow inheritor of the age to come, a fellow citizen of the kingdom of God. But it might also be a play on the Septuagint's Greek translation of Exodus 21:6, which uses the exact same word here for age in reference specifically for slaves who choose to remain with their master of their own accord for the rest of their lives, their age. If that is the case, then Paul is not saying that Onesimus should no longer be a slave, but that Onesimus should come back and be allowed to choose to continue to be Philemon's slave. Like Onesimus should be allowed to return and should not be severely punished. But the relationship between Philemon and Onesimus should change given that they are both Christians and beloved brothers. But instead of Philemon just simply freeing Onesimus, Onesimus should choose to remain the slave of his Christian brother. We don't know, but what we do know is that in the letter to Philemon, there is no clear call for manumission, no explicit demand that Onesimus be released from his lot in life. Paul is asking that something change, but it's not clear exactly what that means.